Hi guys, my name is Clara. I'm a 2D artist and illustrator from Argentina with more than 5 years of experience working mainly in the Japanese game industry. Although my main focus is in character illustration and concept art, I've also done some 2D animation work with Spine, and I would like to share with you my workflow and some tips that weren't so self-explanatory to me right away when I first started to use the program. Since this is going to be a quite lengthy video, I'll be speeding the recording on sections that might be a bit repetitive or self-explanatory, but I'll try to slow it down when the setup gets a bit more complicated. Also, I'll be uploading the file that I'm using in this video to Gumroad in case you'd like to purchase it to use as a base for your own animations. Anyways, everything will be linked in the video, so let's get started. So I just brought my illustration to Photoshop. This is the character that I'm going to be using. As you can see, the image has some transparencies that might cause problems when we start animating, so I'm gonna fix that now before starting to divide the image. Here I'm merging all of the layers into a single layer, selecting the character and filling a layer underneath with a single color. You can redo this process a couple of times if the image still looks a bit transparent. Also, to check that there's no transparencies left, I'm going to fill in a background layer with a bright color to make any transparencies a bit more noticeable. So the transparencies seem okay, but the color underneath is slightly changing the overall color of the character. So I'm going to select the layer we filled in and loosely painting with some colors closer to those affected areas. Yeah, the color seems a bit better now, so I'm gonna merge both character layers and duplicate to have a template before starting to divide the image. So once that's done, I'm going to pick the lasso tool and I'm going to start to divide and rename the layers. So a little tip that I learned along the way that saved me some time when setting up the character in Spine is for parts and limbs that look exactly the same in the character, you can avoid exporting them as a layer and later on duplicate it in Spine. And as I understand it, this will also make the rendering a bit lighter. So I'm not going to cut off the dog's legs here, I'm just going to erase them for the moment and then duplicate them in Spine. So you might want to have a rough idea of where you're going to place the bones. For me, doing little drawings of the bones as I go helps me visualize where to break the image later. But this is not set in stone. Later on, I always end up coming back to Photoshop to fix parts to make them fit a little better. especially more complex animations, so you don't need to worry too much about it at this point. So once all of the layers are divided, I go in with a brush to fill in all of those holes left behind. You want to make sure the different parts have a little bit of sparse surface on places where they're going to move. For example, in the case of the hairline under the hat, the eyes, the nose, the mouth, etc. I want to be able to attach them to a bone and move them freely, so I'm filling in the whole face in a way that is not going to look off when I move the different parts. So, something that can be very useful when dividing a character that's been already posed, like this one, or when you have parts that moves a bit more smoothly, yet they've been drawn on their bent form, is creating a new set of limbs in their straight form. In this case, instead of redrawing it, I'm going to duplicate the arm and use the paper wrap tool to straighten it to an extent and fix a little bit the parts that look unnatural. So once all of the parts are divided and properly named, it is time to export them to Spine. But before that, because I want the character to be correctly positioned in the Spine canvas, what I'm going to do is assign the root position right here in Photoshop. For that, I'm going to drag the ruler from the corner and set it right at the base of the character. After this, Spine offers a very useful plugin that you can download from their site. I'll put the link in the description. So we're gonna head to File, Scripts, and select Photoshop to Spine, and just like that, we export it to the default folder named Images. Next, with Spine open, I'm going to drag the JSON file to the canvas, and in this window I'm going to check New Project, and here you can change the name of your skeleton if you wish. To the right we have a list of attachments, and under root I'm going to create another bone at the base named character. This bone is going to hold all of the child bones assigned to the character of the boy. Another tip you can use to make your process more efficient is placing the template image we exported at the bottom of the draw order list and change its color to a color that doesn't mix with the characters, so this will make it easier to place the parts correctly on top. So here I'm at the root again, and I'm creating another bone to hold all of the dog attachments and the bones that we will place under it. So once that's done, I'm going to start setting the character's skeleton, and I'm gonna start from the hip up and enabling a rotation and naming each child bone accordingly. So once the bones are set, some people like to just attach the bones to the attachments by weight and keep them all together at the top. But I think that having every attachment under their assigned bone is just easier for me. By the way, if you mess up the place of a bone, you don't need to go and redo everything. You can just enable bone compensation at the bottom and just move the bone without affecting the child bones. If you have an image attached to it already, you can also enable image compensation, which both are located down there in the little window that says bones and images. So at the beginning of the video when dividing the dog, I didn't export all of the legs. So what I'm doing here is selecting the legs with its bones and attachments and going to the base of the tree, hit on duplicate and moving it to the back and renaming them. You want to make sure down in draw order that these attachments are behind the dog's body. You can also do this once the legs are already meshed. However, you have to make sure that they're not attached to any other bones by weights. So around here I realized I wanted to give my character an additional bone to control the body movement from the hips. So what I'm doing is activating bone and images compensation and moving the body bone to the outside of the hip area and rearranging the torso and hip bones. So around here I'm starting to mesh the images. You can go with the create tool and create your mesh. However, I usually like to start with something, so I use the trace tool to give me some vertices, and I use the modify and create tool to move them around and adjust them. So once the mesh is done, I'm gonna head to the bottom and click on weight and bind the image to the shoulder and arm bones from top to bottom. You click on bind and auto, and this will distribute the weight harmoniously. However, if the weights are incorrectly distributed, you can always go and add or remove a weight manually, clicking on the bones name and adding or subtracting. After distributing the weight, I like to make a little animation to test the arm, whether it's moving correctly, and if not, to adjust the weights accordingly. This will be the basic setup for the limbs, so from now on I'm going to repeat this process for all of them. So for the legs, as this is going to be a walk animation, we want to control them more efficiently and make sure that they align with the ground. To that end, I'm going to add inverse kinematics or IK to each of them. As IKs only work with two bones at a time, so I'm going to select the first two main bones, go to New, IK Constraint, and click on the base of the foot. This will become a new target bone, which will control the leg, and after this we want to make sure to correctly assign the weight of the leg so the top of the leg doesn't separate from the rest of the body. For the backpack, I want to give the illusion of depth or 3Dness, so I'm going to mesh it, making sure the front facing side is completely separated from the top and from the hidden face. Also, when meshing 2.5 dimensional objects, you wanna try to make the lines follow the perspective that you're trying to achieve. In my case, the frontal facing lines are almost horizontal and the lines of the hidden face are slightly tilted. For the bones, we are going to need two bones in this case to give the image dimension. The first bone is going to be attached to the vertices dividing the faces of the backpack, and the other one will be set outside of the backpack towards the front. And using weights, I'll attach the first bone to the vertices on the division line and the rest to the control bone outside of the backpack. For the head, similar to the backpack, I want to give it a bit more of a subtle movement, so I'm creating a face control bone for the front and one for the back of the head, and I'm also bringing all of the face parts under a new bone called face holder. Then I'm going to create a transform constraint for the head. For that, I'm going to click on the bone face control back, go to new, click on transform constraint, and then click on the face control bone. And I'm going to name it face 3D. In the panel at the bottom, click on match and set translate on mix to -100 each. This will make the control bones move in opposite directions to each other. Next, I'm selecting the face holder bone and attaching it through transform constraints to the face control bone. Same as before, I'm going to match, and in translate, I'm going to assign them 50 and 50 for the moment. Next, I'm going to bind the head image to both face control bones. The face features and the head are a bit off, so I'm gonna adjust the face control holder constraints, and instead of translate 50, I'm going to give it around 75. And later on, I'm going to adjust the weight of the face to expand and contract a little bit when following the control bones. As you can see, the beanie and the head are moving accordingly, and as I don't plan to have the beanie bounce independently from the head, I decided to combine both parts in Photoshop and re-export them as a single layer. So after checking all of the parts are correctly attached to their bones through weight, we can proceed to animate the walk cycle. Make sure to go down to the animations folder and make a folder that will contain all of your character animations separated by character. This will come in handy later on when you want to separate the character's skeletons. Starting with the legs, we are going to pose the character, mainly moving the IK at the bottom of the foot. Make sure the auto key button is selected and that the loop starts and ends on the same key poses. You can always copy the first line of keyframes clicking at the top of the list in the blank space and use shortcuts Ctrl C to copy and Ctrl V to paste. Also, if you're not super familiar with how a walk cycle is supposed to look, you can always Google it. There's plenty of graphics that show a breakdown of the poses online. I usually like to use as reference the Animator's Survival Kit by Richard Williams, which contains lots of different walk cycles, and they're very well explained and broken down. So adjusting the walk can take a while, but after you get close to the end, you can select the keyframes and add a bezier curve. This will add some smoothness to the ins and outs of the animation. And for a more detailed adjustment of the curve, you can always go to the tab called Graph by the dub sheet and manually adjust the timing and smoothness of the walk. Here I'm adjusting the backpack and the body bond we set to control the character from the hip to subtly control the body's bounciness. I've also moved the character bond to tilt the body forward a little bit. You want to make sure you don't touch the root bond to move the character, as this can cause issues when the character is brought to a game engine. So I just adjusted the head movement, and for the eyes I'm just going to do a very basic blinking by using the scale tool and scaling down the parent bone. In this case it would be the white part of the eye, which contains all of the other parts. So I just finished the walk cycle for the boy character, and from this point on, I'm pretty much going to repeat the same process for the dog character. I would say the biggest difference between the two walks would be that in the dog's case, I've offsetted the legs to make them more accurate to a dog's walk. And you can do this by selecting all the keyframes and clicking on the offset button. However, you do have to make sure your first and last keyframes are the same, otherwise, the program won't let you move the keyframes. that's it for the animation part. Next I'm going to move the dog character to a different skeleton with all of its attachments and animations. For that, I think the fastest way is to duplicate the skeleton we currently have and to erase the character bone and all of the animations that correspond to the voice character. So next I'm going to erase the dog bone and the dog's animations from the character skeleton, and that should get both characters completely separated. So as the last step, I'm going to File, Export, and setting the parameters under which I want to export the movie file. In my case, I'm going to export both skeletons together with 10 loops and a black background. For format, I'm selecting MOV under video and exporting to MP4 with 30 frames per second and a scale of 85. Then you go to export and that should do it. So your final project file should look something like this: the final animation, the current spine file, a PSD file, a JSON file, and a folder for your cutout images. And that is it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be putting this project with all of its files in my Gumroad, and you can use these skeletons for studying and or as a base for your own projects. Let me know if this was helpful at all, and if you like these kind of videos in the comments. Thank you so much. Bye bye.